my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by Aeroflow Breast Pumps. Aeroflow has helped millions of new and expecting parents discover the breastfeeding and postpartum essentials covered by their insurance, including breast pumps, maternity compression, and lactation education and support. They take care of everything, including all paperwork, working with your insurance company, and explaining your options to get these free essentials. Aeroflow offers all major breast pump brands, including Medela, Spectra, Motif, Lancino, Amita, Elvie, Willow, and more. All you have to do is go to aeroflowbreastpumps.com/birthhour and fill out their free and easy qualify through insurance form. Extra bonus, if you use the coupon code TBH15 in their online shop, you'll get 15% off all supplies and accessories. Head over to aeroflowbreastpumps.com/birthhour to get started. At the end of this episode, I'll be talking to Megan all about her experience using Aeroflow breast pumps to get her breast pump for free through insurance. I'd love to take a minute to tell you about our online childbirth course called Know Your Options. This course takes you from the final weeks of pregnancy all the way through preparing for birth and postpartum, as well as a bonus course all about pumping, storing milk, and preparing to go back to paid work if that's part of your plan. You can see all the different modules laid out for you and more information at thebirthhour.com/course. When you sign up for the Know Your Options course, you get lifetime access and instant access. So you can work at your own pace, and we would love to have you join the private Facebook group for that course, as well as our bi-weekly Zoom calls. So again, head over to thebirthhour.com/course to get all of the info and use the coupon code 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. I also want to invite you guys to join our Patreon group if you're looking for a community of people to support you during this time, whether you're trying to conceive, pregnant, postpartum, just love birth. It's really the greatest group of people on the internet. That's at patreon.com/birthhour. And for just $5 a month, you can join that community. And you can even get a discount if you sign up for an annual membership. All right, today's guest is Bekah. Bekah's going to be sharing her birth center birth story. She wanted to share her experience with a doula that didn't really show up for her in the way that she expected, and how she wants people to be sure to know ahead of time to make their expectations really clear with their doula. And then she also wanted to share, aside from her birth story, her postpartum experience and how she's planning a little bit differently for that with her second baby. So I hope you enjoy hearing Bekah's story. Hi, Bekah. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, Bryn. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I've been binge listening to your podcast as usual, and I'm so excited that I get to add my story to the list.
Well, will you tell people a little bit about you and your family, and then we'll get into your story?
Yes. So I am 24 years old, living in the greater Los Angeles area, and I have a 1-year-old daughter who actually just turned 1 yesterday, the day we're recording right now. And I am currently almost 21 weeks along with our second. So yeah, I have a podcast of my own. It's called Chatty Broads Podcast. And I have an active social media presence as well. And those are kind of my two jobs, if you will.
Yeah. Before we started recording, you mentioned that you had recorded your birth story just kind of right after she was born. We'll have to link to that episode so people can hear kind of 1 year later how you tell it versus then.
Yes. It definitely may be slightly different, but I think it's pretty interesting to contrast my perspective now versus then.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's start with finding out you were pregnant and how your pregnancy went.
Yeah. So this is kind of the first interesting element. My boyfriend and I were together for 3 months when I found out that I was pregnant. Wow. Yes. And that was a very interesting, emotional difficult experience. And I found out pretty early on, we kind of knew that we had, quote, messed up. But it's one of those weird things you kind of just think, I was 22 at the time, and you sort of think kind of stupidly, like, oh, it's not going to happen to me. And especially, you know, I hear this all the time on this podcast and others, like so many other people, it takes many tries sometimes to conceive. And so we sort of brushed it aside, but I took a pregnancy test 2 days before I was supposed to start my period, and it was a big fat positive. And so, yeah, those first few weeks after finding out I was pregnant, and actually the first few months even, weren't really fun. And I knew that I wanted to be a mother, and my boyfriend, Grayston, he knew that he wanted to be a father. But when you don't know the person that you've just conceived a child with, it can be a really difficult and emotional experience. But we decided that we wanted to move forward with the journey of bringing a child into the world together. And yeah, that was how it started, finding out I was pregnant. It's very different from this second one, that's for sure.
So I'm guessing with it not being an intentional pregnancy, you probably hadn't done a lot of thinking about like pregnancy and birth and all of that.
Well, actually, I had been a nanny for 5 years before I got pregnant. Okay. And sort of the funny thing was, after the last family I had worked with, I said, you know, I think the next time I take care of children, I want them to be my own. And I knew that having children was something I definitely wanted to do. And oddly enough, I had already been following a number of birth accounts on Instagram,
really?
like, Empowered Birth Project, Carriage House Birth, Badass Mother Birther. There was like a few that I was already following because I have no idea why, but I always sort of found it fascinating. And so it kind of was something that was already on my mind in terms of how I wanted to do things when I was eventually going to have my own children.
That's so interesting. I hear that every now and then from people that are following me, and they're like, I don't have kids. I'm not having kids anytime soon. I'm just fascinated by birth.
Yeah. So I sort of did. That was actually one of the few things where I was like, okay, I kind of know how I want this experience to go. And it sort of felt like the one element at the time that I had control over. Not actual control in a sense, but sort of an idea of what I wanted and how to sort of put ourselves in the direction of where I wanted to go in terms of the birth.
Yeah. Well, do you want to talk a little bit about what you chose as far as care provider and location and everything?
Yeah. So, and as far as the pregnancy goes, it was pretty average in terms of like my early experience. Some nausea, vomiting, headaches, super, super fatigued, all that kind of thing. And then my mother, actually, she had wanted to give birth at a birth center or with a midwife with me. I'm her first child. And it was something my dad didn't feel comfortable with. But, you know, when I talked to her, she was totally on board with the idea of me birthing outside of a hospital. And so that was really helpful for me to be able to talk through different things with her and kind of bounce back ideas. And I was also reading this book that takes you week by week through the pregnancy. I really like it. It's called Mama Natural's. Gosh, now I can't think of the name of it.
It's like week by week pregnancy.
Yes.
We've had her on, Genevieve.
Yes. It's really great for a first time mom. And I know like Mama Natural sounds super crunchy, but I myself am that way, but I didn't find it to be like really overbearing in terms of like, go natural, like go crunchy kind of message. But she, in her book, says like, it's time to think of whatever week, like it's time to think about providers. Like here is a traditional hospital and OBGYN option. Here is a birth center option. Here is a home birth option. Here are the different types of midwives. And that was really, really helpful to have that laid out for me early on. And I sort of felt like I wanted to go for the first birth with a CNM, with a registered nurse midwife. I felt like we wanted to have a little bit of a happy medium. And we interviewed at 12 weeks a midwife at a birth center in Los Angeles. And my mom came along and we just immediately felt really comfortable. It was a little bit more of a, I don't know how you would describe it. Now I have a different midwife, and she's a little bit more like mother-led. And I guess this midwife practice at this birth center is a little bit more like the head midwife worked at a hospital for 15 years. I don't know how to describe it. So I guess
maybe
it'd be
more like focused on like the policies and procedures of the birth center.
Yes, which was kind of actually nice for the first one to have sort of a guideline to go through. And there's some things I would change now going forward with the second. But as a first-time mom, I found that really helpful. So pretty early on, we found a birth center and a midwife that we felt really comfortable with and just started on that path.
So you read the book and you found your care provider. Did you do anything else to prepare?
Oh my God, so much. I really kind of dove in head first pretty early on. I read, as so many women do, Ina May's Guide to Natural Childbirth. And that one of the main takeaways from that book that really reframed the whole pregnancy going into the birth was the idea of reframing pain in childbirth and thinking about how it's different when you give birth and the pain of that versus when you break your leg, for instance, because when you break your leg, that pain is sending a signal through your body that there's something wrong and, you need to get help. But how when you're in labor, it's different because this pain has a purpose and it's your body doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing to bring the baby out. And that just really helped me reframe that idea of pain. And it was something I kind of practiced mentally throughout the whole pregnancy. Like, this is kind of silly, but like if I was getting waxed, like getting a bikini wax, I would be like, this is pain with a purpose. So I'm going to breathe through it. And like, this is not me being injured right now. This is just like the pain of hair leaving my body. And it was kind of funny because I was just sort of practicing that mindset throughout the pregnancy. And I really felt like that helped my overall mentality going into labor. And then aside from that, I really just dove into listening to your podcast. And specifically for my first pregnancy, I actually kind of only listened to stories of like how I wanted my birth to go and listened to some too of like birth center transfers to hospital so I could kind of prepare myself for that possibility. But I was kind of just only focusing on how I wanted my birth to go. And then I also was really diving into those Instagram accounts, some of the ones that I mentioned, and also just watching tons of births on YouTube. YouTube being gentle birth, peaceful birth, all those different kind of keywords, healing birth. And then we also, my partner and I took a hypnobirthing class together. And so I did quite a lot. And I also just did a lot of mental preparation, kind of like I was talking about, like when I would even feel myself driving in the car and would feel my shoulders and my neck and back tense up, I would practice breathing and releasing the tension in my body and practice just relaxing into whatever moment I was in, especially stressful or anxious moments throughout my pregnancy, which there kind of were a lot, just with everything we were dealing with emotionally and getting to know each other, me and my partner and I as a couple. And I was just always practicing relaxing my body. Yeah. So that, I guess, kind of covers the ways that I was preparing.
Yeah, you did a lot. That's amazing. Especially because you said the first half of your pregnancy, you were just still kind of processing the fact that you were even pregnant.
Totally. But I got really excited, and it was kind of funny. The last, I'd say, 5 or 6 weeks of my pregnancy, I remember telling people, you know what? I don't think there's any more preparing I can do. Like I've got my mental game on lock, and I've just, at this point, gotta relax and I just felt like I was prepared out. I was like, there's nothing more I can do. I've done all I can. But yeah, I was really, really excited to give birth. And I just had this idea of like, this is sort of almost a psychedelic kind of journey, and who knows how I'll handle it. And there's something that's really thrilling and exciting about that, about not knowing what's to come, rather than it being a scary thing.
Yeah, I like that.
Oh, yes. And I should note, because this is kind of an important part of my story, that, you know, in all of this preparation, over and over, one of the themes that you keep hearing, especially in the unmedicated birth community, is have a doula. I guess it's not just in the unmedicated birth community, but I kept hearing over and over again the importance of having a doula. And so I was like, okay, I'm checking all my boxes, so I'm going to hire a doula. And I actually, the way that I was recommended I had some recommendations from friends, but their doulas were either like already booked. That was actually the one thing I sort of delayed on until maybe my last 10 or 12 weeks of pregnancy, of finding and hiring a doula. And everyone was kind of already booked or currently unavailable. And so the recommendation I got was actually directly from an author and birth activist who's pretty prominent in the LA birthing community and who has a doula collective. And so I felt really confident about the doula that I was recommended, who was also training to be a midwife and worked at a birth center in the LA area. And so I felt really confident when we interviewed this person that she was going to be a really great additional support. We had decided that my mom and my partner, Grayston, were going to be there with me and the doula. And so we were really looking forward to having a doula to sort of support my mom and my boyfriend in supporting me. We had multiple meetings with her throughout the pregnancy with my mom and boyfriend, and we all felt really good about it. And there are some things I just want to, it might be kind of confusing why I'm saying this right now, but it'll kind of make sense as I go into my story. She was saying, you're young, you're going to have probably a really quick labor. I'm not really sure why she was saying that. Side note, my mom had a over 24-hour labor, and it was my first child. And I was like, okay, well, sounds good. If you think I'm going to have a short labor, cool. Anyway, so how I went into labor, I was fully prepared to go over my due date. And the birth center has a policy, you can only go up to 42 weeks, and then you have to go into the hospital and be induced. And I was like, I'm probably going to go like 41 or 42 weeks over, because I was just really like pretty comfortable at the end of my pregnancy. Like I didn't have that feeling that I hear women talk about of like, I'm ready for this baby to come out. I wasn't super uncomfortable, wasn't having any hip or back pain, was sleeping perfectly fine, all this kind of stuff. And so I was like, I don't think this baby's coming out anytime soon and we also didn't know the sex of the baby. So I was like, I don't think this baby's coming out anytime soon. I feel good. Seems like the baby's comfortable in there. So we'll see what happens. Well, my mom came into town at my due date when I was at 40 weeks. And we were like, okay, let's start doing some stuff to try to get this baby out. I had already been walking multiple miles a day for the past couple weeks and, drinking red raspberry leaf tea and eating like 10 dates a day and all that kind of thing. And then at my 40-week appointment, my midwife gave me some homeopathy little pills. And so I started taking those. And then I think it was the day, So the day after my due date, my mom and I actually walked an equivalent of 18 flights of stairs up and down a nearby hill from my house. And I mean, we were just really going. We're like, let's get this baby out. And in hindsight, I don't know if I would have done that because I had a long laboring journey ahead. So that was like on the evening of January 31st. And probably around like 6 p.m., we did all that crazy walking. And then later that evening, I was hanging out with my mom and dad at their Airbnb, and we were watching World War Z, which I am terrified of zombies. So I was like panicking watching that movie. And in the middle of watching the movie, that morning, by the way, this is why we started doing all the walking. I had sort of very light pink tinged discharge. So I thought, and I had felt just kind of a little bit different. So I thought that something might be happening. And then during the movie, I started having very, very slight contractions. And I didn't really tell anyone. I was just kind of paying attention, and I was feeling like these slight little contractions every 20 minutes or so. And I had a lot of Braxton Hicks throughout my pregnancy, like since 20 weeks or something crazy like that. And it definitely did not feel like Braxton Hicks. It felt like very mild period cramps, which I hear a lot of women say. So I started feeling that. And then I went to the bathroom and I had my mucus plug come out. So I was like, all right, this is a good sign. Still not really telling my mom and dad that I was feeling contractions. My boyfriend got off work. The two of us went home and I went to sleep. And then that night around 2 a.m., I woke up really starting to like feel these contractions, feel these cramps. And I went to the bathroom and I had my bloody show. So I was excited and then also started to kind of panic, and my boyfriend was asleep next to me, and I was kind of like started getting in my head like, wait, how is this happening right now? Which is kind of crazy because I was 40 weeks and 1 day. And I'm like, now looking back on it, it's like, what was I thinking? Like, how is this happening now? I'd been preparing and all of a sudden I started panicking, like, is this really going to happen right now? But I listened to some music and calmed down, and contractions were coming like maybe every 10 to 15 minutes, and I couldn't sleep very well through them. I was trying to sleep because that's what everyone says to do, of course, but I kind of couldn't. And then around 6 a.m., like when the sun came up, they just went away. And so throughout that, well, they didn't go away. They just started really spreading out again, maybe every 30 minutes or so. So that morning, this is the morning of the 1st, I went to the birth center and they checked me because I wanted to be checked, and I was at a 1. And I wasn't really discouraged or anything about that. I was just kind of curious as to where I was at. And they're like, hey, just based on everything that's kind of happened in the past 24 hours, this baby could totally come in the next couple of days. So I was happy about that. That whole day, since I hadn't really got any sleep the night before, and I had walked about 18 flights of stairs the day before, I was pretty tired and just throughout the day was trying to nap. But it was kind of funny, even though the contractions were only coming every 20 or 30 minutes throughout the day, they still, when one would come, it was uncomfortable and it would kind of jolt me up from my nap. So I wasn't really able to sleep very well at all throughout the day. So I was kind of just lounging around the house. Didn't want to try to walk it out or anything again, because I sort of had this sense that I needed to conserve my energy because correctly, I thought that I was going to have a long labor ahead. So throughout all this, I'm just like texting my doula, checking in with her, letting her know what's going on. And then that evening, it was like when the sun went down again, it was like immediately contractions started picking back up again. I want to check my contractions timer because I think I still have it on my phone.
Nice.
Yeah. So around like 6 p.m., oh, and I was incorrect actually through the night before. So then the night when I first started having contractions, that started around 2 a.m., I was actually having contractions every 5 to 8 minutes all throughout the night until about 9 a.m. And then that's when they started spreading out again. And then so the evening of the 1st, around 6 p.m., the contractions started picking up again. They started lasting about a minute. And we're coming about every 6 minutes or so. And I'm kind of having fun. I was on the birthing ball, just like listening to music, swaying my hips, hanging out. And I had actually really wanted to stay home as long as possible before going to the birth center. I actually had wanted to have, so the midwives at the birth center do also do home births. But I don't know why I brought it up to them for the first time at like 38 weeks. And they're like, okay, we'd kind of prefer to plan this a little more in advance. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But the reason that I wanted to even have a home birth is because I didn't want to go through that car ride. I was really worried about changing locations and having that stall my labor. Because like I said, I was listening to so many stories, and I wanted to make sure that I was like really close to the end before going to the birth center, because like one of my biggest concerns was stalling my labor. And it's kind of funny because I avoided water through a lot of my labor because I didn't want to stall it. So around 6 or 7, the contraction started picking back up, minute long, every 6 or 7 minutes. And my mom and grandma had been there throughout the day, but then they went back to their Airbnb, and so it was me and my boyfriend, and he went to sleep. And so from like 9 p.m. for the next few hours, I mean, I was laboring on my own, and contractions were starting to last slightly longer than a minute, still keeping pretty consistent time coming every 6 to 8 minutes. And it was actually, I was fine doing it on my own. I had this kind of little circuit where I was laying on my bed, and I was kind of napping for a few minutes. And then when I would feel a contraction coming, I called them moments, actually. I didn't call them contractions. I'd be like, I'm having a moment. And I would go and I'd walk to the bathroom, and I'd kind of sway through my contraction or hold onto the sink. And then I would go back and lay in bed. And so all that time is kind of blurry. And then around 1 a.m. or so, contractions are still coming around the same time apart and lasting about the same length, but they started getting more intense to the point where I couldn't time them anymore. And at this point, I don't really remember if I was just avoiding waking my boyfriend up for some reason. I don't really know what was going on, but I had once again, like I said, been texting and talking on the phone with my doula and letting her know kind of where I was at. And she was just kind of like, okay, you're there. All right. Like, and she kept saying like, well, this could last like a lot longer, so just keep trying to nap. And I was like, oh, okay. And then around like 1 a.m. or I think it was around 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., I started vomiting, and my contractions all of a sudden just started coming like back to back. So I was sitting on the toilet for some of my contractions because I know this sounds like, everyone says this and it's like, oh, they needed to push when they feel like they needed to poop. But I actually had to pee and poop after almost every single contraction when I got to a certain point, like probably around midnight. It was like almost every contraction, I felt like I had to go sit and like just try to evacuate everything out of me. And that was indeed happening. So I was doing that, and I was vomiting, and these contractions just started like stacking one on top of the other and started getting really intense. And I called my doula, and I'm like, these contractions are coming like on top of each other. And I just, with the vomiting and everything, this is getting like really hard for me to cope with. And it was kind of weird. Like she said, okay, well, get in the shower and drink some water, and the shower should help you slow things down. I'm like, okay. And she's like, just keep updating me. And this is the first time where I remember in my labor, I was like, this is kind of weird. Like in my labor land mode, I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, why is she not offering to come? And I knew she lived about 45 minutes away. And I was just like, okay. And this is where I kind of started getting in my own head about the labor, because I'm reasoning and trying to think logically about it and being like, okay, she is, training to be a midwife. She's like attended hundreds of births now. So like, even though I'm having these contractions on top of each other, like, and all of this, like she's not offering to be here. So like, that must mean I'm not very advanced in labor, So I was like, okay, well, that kind of sucks, but I'm assuming that she would like make herself available. Yeah, I don't know. So it kind of messed with my head a little bit, but I got in the shower and oh my gosh, it was heavenly. And I was like, why had I been delaying this for so long? But it did indeed kind of slow down my contractions. I'm not sure how far apart they were at this point, maybe like 3 or 4 minutes apart. And I called my mom. And that was also the weird thing, is I sort of felt at that point with my doula, like I needed to, I felt almost like I needed someone to advocate on my behalf for her to be there. Like it was this weird sort of feeling I had. And so I called my mom and had my mom come over. This is probably around like 2 a.m. And my mom and I just get into this groove together and sort of this rhythm where we're doing the thing where I'm laying on my bed and napping in these 3 or 4 minutes in between contractions. And I start having one, and she would help walk me to the restroom, and she would put pressure on my hips and gently touch my shoulders and help me as I was swaying through these contractions. And she and I were just in this really beautiful rhythm together. And it was just really, really lovely. And it was odd though, because I then text my doula maybe around 3 a.m. because my contractions are now lasting my contractions were lasting like 1:45. It was weird. I felt like they were lasting really, really long. And just the other day, actually, I was listening to your podcast and someone was talking about, what are they called? Like double peak contractions?
Yeah, double peaking.
Yeah. And when I heard someone say that, I was like, I wonder if I was experiencing that. Because I'm looking at my contractions timer that my mom was keeping track of at that point around 3 a.m. And my contractions were like 2 minutes and 5 seconds long. And I think I might have been experiencing that because I would sort of feel like it was over or feel like it was starting to dissipate. And then I would hit sort of the peak again. So I might have been experiencing double peaking contractions. I'm not sure. Anyway, so all this kind of stage is sort of a blur. But I did text my doula and I said, hey, at what point do you normally come? And she said, like, when your contractions are, I don't remember, she said like 3 minutes apart, 1 minute in duration, something like that. And I think at that point I was just in such labor land. I just saw that and I was like, okay. And like, I sort of already told you that my contractions had at one point been on top of each other. Like, all right. And at that point I just sort of was like, I wasn't thinking about my doula being there anymore. I was just focusing on getting through these contractions with my mom. And then around, I want to say 5 or 6 a.m., I think it was my mom actually that said, like, I think we should call the midwife. I think we should call the doula. And I was like, okay. So we called the midwife, and it was so funny because my contractions had been coming like maybe every two or 3 minutes or so at that point, maybe even closer together. And when my midwife wanted to hear me go through a contraction on the phone. And when my midwife got on the phone with me, my contractions spread out immediately to 10 minutes. Like it was 10 minutes in between. It was the longest in between contractions I had in like 12 hours. And I think it was me having like performance anxiety. Like I was kind of worried, like she's not going to think I'm that far in labor. And so my contraction was so spread apart. And I was like, on the phone, I was like, Simona, I swear, like my contractions have not been this far apart. But then she heard me go through a contraction and she's like, no, you can definitely come in right now, like head over. So contractions right after that go back into being 2 minutes apart or wherever they're at. Like I said, this was around 6 a.m. or so. And it was actually only like a 9-minute drive to the birth center because it was a Saturday morning. This is now the morning of the 2nd. And so there's no one on the road. And so the car ride was definitely interesting. I was in the back seat, holding on to the back of the chair for dear life. And, that was an interesting experience, but we get there and I just had like a hood over my face. I might have even had like sunglasses on, and I was just like, nothing is going to break me out of this labor land mode right now. So I just like shuffled up this flight of stairs. The birth center is on the 2nd floor. I don't even remember any of that. And when we got there, I said to the midwife, I said, you can check me, but I do not want to know, because in my head still, and again, this was sort of because of like the doula thing and her not like offering to be there. I had this idea that I must have been at like 4 or 5 centimeters dilated. And my mom actually thought that too. She was like, everything had been going so smoothly. I thought that maybe you were maybe several centimeters dilated. And, at this point I've been having contractions since 2 a.m. on the 1st. So it's been a long time of contractions. And she checks me. And when she checks me, my water breaks on the table with a gush. And it was kind of funny because I thought in my head, like, oh, now labor's really going to start. Well, little did I know that when we got to the birth center, I was already in a 9. And they only told me that after. And so, like I said, I'm prepping myself like, all right, here's where the real intense part is going to come in. And then I asked my mom, we were just kind of laboring and just, me and her in the room. And I threw up a couple more times. And I asked my mom, like, did they say when I could get in the tub? And she goes, oh, they said you can get in the tub whenever you want. And then I kind of knew, oh, I must be kind of coming to the end with this. And I got excited and got in the tub. And then I started getting really kind of fearful for the first time in my labor of the phase that was going to come next with pushing. And I think it's because so my mom had an unmedicated labor with me in the hospital, and she ended up having a 4th degree tear and a lateral episiotomy. And that really was in my head. And I knew that probably wasn't going to happen to me just because of the circumstances of how she was birthing were very different. But I started panicking because I was like, okay, the contractions can't hurt me. I had reframed that pain. What about the pushing? Like, the pushing could hurt me. Like, I could tear horribly. Like, this is what started going through my head. And I kind of started getting really fearful. And then this is kind of interesting because I sort of knew that I was fully dilated, and I sort of felt the baby drop into my pelvis, which was like such a strange experience. It was like a thunk, like a thud. And that was an odd feeling, but I sort of then got into this mode where I was like, okay, like, I think I'm at 10 centimeters. Like, I felt the baby drop into my pelvis. Like, so now it must be time to push. And one thing I really want to emphasize, and something that I would have changed looking back, is as long as everything's, fine with baby, there's no rush, nothing like that. Like, you don't have to start pushing until you feel like you need to push. And that's definitely something I'm going to change this time around with this baby, is I'm going to really wait until I have this serious urge to push, because I think I started pushing prematurely. And I think I really tired myself out early on. So I kind of started trying to push in the water, and was pushing, trying. And then we got out of the tub and got onto the bed and was trying to push. Basically, I ended up pushing for 2.5 or 3 hours. And not only do I think I started pushing prematurely, I also really think that fear of pushing the baby out really stood in my way, because I felt like I, for the first time in the labor, really tensed my body up and tensed my lower half up because of that fear. And so I feel like I was pushing against my body sort of contracting in fear, if that makes sense. And I felt like that was holding my body back from opening up. And so, and I think that also made the experience more painful, because, okay, I know this is really obnoxious, but when I was dilated to a 9, I looked at my boyfriend and my mom and I said, well, this isn't as hard as everyone says it is. And then when I was pushing, I was like, this is really hard. Like, this is really hard. But I was just so, like, my body was so tense, and I was holding so much fear in my body that it really became a lot more painful in the time I was pushing. And eventually, though, I got back in the tub, and there was a moment sort of where I was looking up at the ceiling. I remember, because I'd sort of been in this spiral of like panic and fear. And there was this moment where I looked up at the ceiling, and I actually have my birth video posted on both YouTube and Instagram. And my birth photographer caught this moment. I'm like looking up at the ceiling, and I sort of had to tell myself, like, just do this. Like, if you just do this, if you just push this baby out, it will be over. Because I was sort of timid when I was pushing. And I was actually even like lying to my midwives, where I was like, nope, I don't feel like I need to push. I was like holding back through my contractions from pushing because I was scared. Finally, I sort of reckoned myself, and I was like, you got to just do this. And so I just like steely eyed, like looked at the ceiling, and I pushed. And I felt my daughter's head coming out, and I felt that ring of fire, and I sort of just sucked it up and said, just keep pushing. And her head came out, and it was like, oh my gosh, she wasn't even fully out. But that moment when her head came out, I was just beaming and like laughing. And I was so happy that part was over. I was like, this is great. And then with one or two more pushes, her body came out, which was such a strange feeling. It's like it slithered out. And and then they placed my baby on my chest, and she was a girl. And I had actually had dreams throughout the pregnancy that she was a girl. And so I was like, I knew it was a girl. And they placed her on my chest in the water, and she cried pretty quickly. It was kind of funny because I heard all these people saying, when they place your baby on your chest, all the pain just disappears and you forget all of it. And even when I was holding her on my chest, I was looking at my mom and my boyfriend and my midwife, and I go, they say that you don't feel the pain anymore when you hold your baby, but I still feel it. I can really still feel it burning right now. And it was kind of funny. I was just like, I'm definitely still aware of what's going on down there. Oh, and I forgot to mention, my mom had called the doula when we were heading to the midwife center, and she got there like right before I got in the tub, right before I was about to start pushing. And so she asked my boyfriend, like, oh, does Bekah want me in the room? And at that point I was like, no, like, you haven't been here through all these hours of labor and like when I really needed the help. So like, that's not really what I was thinking at the time, but at the time I was like, no, like I don't need her now. And so she just went home. And I know that she was a birth doula and not a postpartum doula, but like my family members were in the waiting area, and there was like a lot going on. And it was just odd to me that there wasn't like this offering of like, do you need anything? Grayston, do you need me to run and get you some snacks? Like, she just went home and went back to bed. And so that was interesting. But in that moment, I wasn't really aware of any of this going on. So, had my baby on my chest, and they got me out of the tub and laid me down because I had a small labial tear that they did 2 stitches with. And it's so funny. I almost had like, right at when you're fresh after birth, birth can be like, I'm not saying that every birth is traumatizing, but you're a little like traumatized from what you just experienced pain wise. So I was like, they were giving me a shot to numb me before doing the stitches. And I was like, is the shot gonna hurt? And my boyfriend started laughing because he was like, you're really worried about a shot right now? And I was like, I don't want to go through any more discomfort if I can avoid it. But the shot did not really hurt, and they stitched me up. And then I just laid in the bed at the birth center with my baby, and she latched quite easily, and I was just falling asleep. I was so exhausted at that point. I don't think I had got more than an hour or 2 of sleep in, probably 35 hours or so. At this point, I gave birth to her at 10:14 a.m. on the morning of February 2nd, and I was just so exhausted. And I was happy that it was all over with, and I was feeling really proud. And And then we got in the car and we went home. That's one of the wonderful things about having the baby at the birth center is once they've got you both all checked out and everything's good and you're stable, you can head right home and be in your warm, snuggly bed. And so we drove home and it was just such a surreal feeling. And I was in such an adrenaline high for the next couple of days, aside from the trying to catch up on my sleep, because I was just like, wow, I can't believe that I did that this morning. And so that was my birth experience.
It's such a wild ride. I feel like you went into it knowing so much and then still so many surprises, which is very typical of birth. But
yes, but I did have, I do want to say a thing about birth plans, because I did have like my plan going into it. I actually called it my birth goals rather than my birth plan. And I hear some women say like, I didn't want to have one because you never know what happens in birth. But I had my main like plan, and thankfully everything for the most part kind of went according to plan. And I also had backup plans too. Like, if that plan doesn't go through, like, then this is how I want like a gentle cesarean birth to happen if that needs to happen. And this is who I want, and I think if you can, I think it's important to have an idea of what you want and have what you want in different scenarios should emergencies arise. So in this case, I was pretty happy though, because for the most part, my birth goals came true, and that was awesome.
Was there anything else you want to share from your postpartum period?
Yeah, so I did kind of prepare for the postpartum period. I read the book, The Fourth Trimester, which was a great resource. And I was actually more scared of the postpartum period than the birth. And honestly, in my experience, rightfully so. My mom was there for the first 2 weeks, and I had a lot of hands-on, really helpful support. And we had prepared food for those weeks, and I had prepped myself to not really leave the house actually, we made a rule and said family-only visitors on an invitation basis for the first 2 weeks, and friend visitors upon invitation. And we kind of let everyone know that before giving birth. And that was really, really helpful for me to set boundaries. I did, though, I felt overwhelmed by even seeing congratulatory text messages on my phone. I was didn't really want to talk to anyone, didn't really want to text anyone back. And first few weeks, the sleep deprivation really does a number on you too. But I just was, blubbering a lot about little things. And I guess what I wasn't prepared for was to just not feel like myself, like Bekah. And I love to be social and I love to talk to people. And it was a strange feeling to not feel like myself for those first few weeks. And it was really difficult when my mom went home after 2 weeks. And I sort of wish that I had, I will be doing it this time, investing in a postpartum doula. Or if you don't have the resources for that, I would really encourage sort of stacking and scheduling very supportive friends or family members, if you can, to sort of have someone there at all times who can help feed you and help just do little things around the house and help hold baby while you shower. And all that sort of thing is just so, so invaluable. And also the recovery was pretty painful. I felt like there was this heavy weight in my bottom. And because of the stitches, peeing was really painful. I found an article on the internet called How to Pee Without Crying after birth. And it was really helpful because I literally ended up doing this pose where I would lean forward with my elbows on the bathroom floor so that my urine wouldn't touch my vulva area as I was peeing, because it was so tender and it would sting so bad. Something that really helped with that is I did do, after I stopped heavily bleeding after the first week or so, I started doing vaginal steaming, and that was very glorious. And I felt like that really accelerated my healing process. But yeah, about 5 or 6 weeks in, I started to feel like myself again, kind of almost overnight, and started wanting to hang out with my friends, started wanting to go out and do little things. But Postpartum journey is very difficult, and I think it's really important to prepare in any way that you can for it. And any preparation truly helps. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely having help this time with your toddler at home too will be very necessary.
Yes, they'll only be 16 months apart. And so I am really like I said, stacking schedules of like, okay, this person's going to come into town, and the day they leave, this person's going to come into town and help me out. And so I'm feeling much more equipped though for the second time around.
Good. All right. Well, I feel like you mentioned books and all kinds of things throughout, but are there any resources that you wanted to add that you didn't get to mention yet?
Nothing specific besides what I mentioned, but I just really feel like what was the most helpful for me, even more so than the hypnobirthing class or anything like that. Oh, I did do a lot of breastfeeding research and like studying before I gave birth. And that helped transitioning to motherhood as well. I read Ina May's Guide to Breastfeeding, as well as The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding before giving birth, and took a free online course. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of it. And then watched a lot of YouTube videos as well. And actually, that's sort of how I troubleshooted some of our breastfeeding issues, was like through YouTube. And it's really cool how many free resources there are. But it was just really helpful for me to expose myself to other people's birth stories and other people's birth experiences, and really familiarizing myself with the beauty and the natural process that is giving birth. And I think that was one of the most valuable things that helped me to prepare. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. Did you want to share where people can find you to connect?
I'm on Instagram at Bekah, just Bekah. Funny spelling. But I'm there, and you can find my birth video there as well, and my podcast, Chatty Broads. And and just the one last thing I wanted to note about my experience with the doula. I just really don't want this to discourage any women from taking advantage of that resource. I just really want to emphasize that I wish that there had been more communication on specific expectations for how and when she would be there for me during my birth experience. And so I just really want to emphasize, like, please, if you can hire a doula, please do, and just make the expectations and the conversation really clear beforehand about when and how you want them to be there for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's really hard to know when you're in labor, especially as a first-time mom, like whether you're crazy or whether you are about to have this baby, like it's hard to...
And even something as simple as like, communicating to your doula, could you please ask me continually, like, would you like me to, are you ready for me to come? Like, would you like me to be there? Like, or have your doula ask questions of like, which I feel like is standard, but it wasn't with my experience. And I would hate for someone else to miss out on the experience of having support because that communication wasn't accomplished beforehand.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story and that little bit of words of wisdom there at the end. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandon. It's awesome to share my story.
Now I'm going to chat with Megan about Aeroflow breast pumps, today's sponsor, and to get your free pump through insurance as well as other things like maternity compression garments and lactation education and support, head over to aeroflowbreastpumps.com/birthhour and fill out their free and easy qualify through insurance form. All right, let's hear from Megan. Hi, Megan. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today to chat with me about Aeroflow. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Hi, Bryn. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell listeners a little bit about you before we get into our chat about Aeroflow breast pumps?
Of course, I have 3 kids. My oldest is 4. She was born in 2017. And then my middle is 2. And then my youngest is brand new. He is 6 weeks old.
All right. So tell us about how you discovered Aeroflow breast pumps and why you decided to use them to get your breast pump.
Well, so I discovered Aeroflow through your podcast, of course, which I listened to religiously. Fortunately, I didn't discover your podcast until I was pregnant with my second. And so I started using it with my second and then also with my third. And with my first, I, of course, didn't know about Aeroflow. And so I just got the prescription from the doctor and was sent to a medical supply store, had a wait in line. Was just given this like brown box. I didn't have any choice about which breast pump I was going to get. So I didn't really know any better. So when I found out about Aeroflow, I was like, well, it's almost seemed too good to be true. And,
No.
and it was awesome. So it was exactly what you said it was going to be. It was pretty incredible.
That's really cool. I haven't talked to anybody who has done it without Aeroflow and with. So I'm excited to hear how that was different for you. So for those that don't know, can you just kind of explain the process for getting your breast pump for free through Aeroflow breast pumps?
Sure. So I logged into the website. I typed in some of my information. I think I needed my insurance information, due date, things like that, and then just press submit. And I think honestly, within maybe a day, maybe 2 days, I heard back via email, and they contacted my insurance company and everything. I didn't need to actually even give them a prescription. I think they contacted my midwife. Mm-hmm. And then they first said it was just kind of in process. And then maybe a day or two later, I got to access my personal page that had choices of probably a dozen different breast pumps that I had to choose from. Some were free, some were for an upcharge. So it was really cool. And then I could take the time and kind of research which ones I wanted and which ones would best suit what I needed. So it was really incredible versus my first time, which I was just literally just handed a brown box. Like, this is what you get.
Yeah.
So that was really incredible.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that they contact your care provider for you and your insurance and everything, because just the last thing you want to be doing is making another call or figuring out how to fax something to somebody or whatever. So that part was really nice for me, and especially that they work with midwives as well as, a doctor's office or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know, and I'm not savvy with insurance.
Is anybody? They
Not
make it really hard.
Not my jam. And so I don't even honestly know how they did it, but they did it. Again, there are very few things that I try to give advice about to people who are pregnant, like pregnant ladies. We already have too much advice that it's unsolicited advice coming in from people. Yeah. But the two things are always Aeroflow and the birth hour.
Aw, I love it.
Because I don't think a lot of the people I've actually told about Aeroflow have never even heard of it. I'm like, you guys have to check this out. It sounds too good to be true, but really, this is what you should do.
Yeah. So. Well, I love that. Thanks for spreading the word.
Yeah.
What pump did you end up going with for your second, and then did you get a new one for your third?
I did. So this is kind of funny. So I was between the Spectra. I used the Medela with my first time around, and then overwhelmingly advice I got was to get the Spectra, but I ended up with a Luna motif based on your podcast, and so I ended up with the Luna motif, and I was really happy with that. And then the third time around, I actually did the super upcharge and got the hands-free one. I think I went with the Willow. Okay. So I'm still figuring that one out, but I'm 6 weeks postpartum, so there's a bit of a learning curve with it. And so I'll go back to work in, a few months. So I'll hopefully figure it out by then.
Awesome. That's so funny. I think I have done the exact same path as you. I started with a Medela, and again, it was just handed to me in a brown box. And then I got a Spectra with my second, I guess, and then the Luna from Motif with my third when that came out. So
how funny.
Yeah. And the Luna was definitely my favorite by far. So
yeah, it was incredible. I know. And it was just funny because, like I said, because I think the Luna wasn't as well known maybe as the Spectra and the Medela.
Right.
And so, maybe I think I took it to my Facebook page, like, anyone have any recommendations? And like overwhelmingly it was the Spectra. And I was like, I'm going to go with the Luna motif. I was like, based on all of the podcasts I listened to, I was like, I'm going to go with Britain's opinion on this one. And I was happy with it. So
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I really appreciate your time today.
All right, Bryn, take care.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.